Buongiorno, buongiorno, buonasera, eccoci qui, che bello rivederci di nuovo quest'anno virtualmente, però look, it's not -20, we're happy today, we are in a good mood. Welcome, le Congrès national des Italo-Canadiens est très très fier de vous souhaiter la bienvenue aujourd'hui, la conférence Journée internationale de la femme, cette année avec le thème La nouvelle réalité. Voici, 2022. Il congresso quest'anno festeggia il 50°. So it's a big year, the 50th anniversary. Tantissimi auguri. My name is Sabrina Marandola. Welcome. I'm a host at CBC Radio here in Montreal. I am the host of the afternoon drive home show on CBC Radio 1. It's called Let's Go with Sabrina Marandola. I am honored to be your MC yet again today. This is the 12th edition. I have been here, I believe, 11 of the 12 years. Oggi è sempre come gli altri anni, festeggeremo alla grande per alcune ragioni. Allora, innanzitutto è la 12ª edizione e ci ritroviamo tutti qui insieme, di nuovo virtuale, però ce la faremo. I would ask you all to mute yourselves, quindi potete spegnere i microfoni. And on va donner la chance aujourd'hui à nos conférenciers de partager leurs expériences, histoires, les défis qu'elles ont surmontés et leurs accomplissements aussi. Donc, restez avec nous pour aujourd'hui la belle conférence. I see some familiar faces here on Zoom. I see some new faces as well. Welcome if it's your first time. Sono 12 anni che qui festeggiamo la festa delle donne insieme, 12 anni che il congresso ci fa scoprire veramente dei gioielli nella nostra comunità. Et pour célébrer la Journée internationale de la femme, le Congrès national des Italo-Canadiens, Région Québec, organise chaque année, c'est depuis 2010, une conférence pour souligner l'importance de l'intégration des femmes dans le milieu professionnel. So it's based on a different theme every year, and this inspiring day introduces you annually to professional women, different cultural backgrounds, and they share their personal and professional experiences with you as well. And this year it's extra special. We're going to hear from inspiring women, but it's also a chance to say thank you. Un gros merci, grazie mille. Today we are giving a platform to two women who have been on the front lines these last 2 years. Donc, on va attendre leurs histoires sous peu. There is a saying that says, one of the deep secrets of life is that all that is really worth doing is what we do for others. Un secret profond de la vie est que tout ce qu'il faut vraiment la peine d'être fait, c'est ce que nous faisons pour les autres. Uno dei segreti più profondi della vita è che tutto ciò che vale davvero la pena di fare è ciò che facciamo per gli altri. And so that is the spirit with which we are here today. Donc, je vais vous présenter les deux conférencières en quelques minutes. Mais premièrement, j'aimerais juste souligner qu'on a parmi nous aujourd'hui Patricia Latanzio, députée Saint-Léonard-Saint-Michel, bienvenue. Philomena Rotti, merci beaucoup d'être ici avec nous, députée de Jean-Mance-Vigée, whip en chef de l'opposition officielle, porte-parole de l'opposition officielle en matière de tourisme, et Chantal Rossi, conseillère de la ville de Montréal-Nord, leader de l'opposition officielle aussi. Donc, pour bien commencer l'événement aujourd'hui, il y a quelqu'un qui aimerait vous souhaiter la bienvenue officielle. Signora Signori, Antonio Sciascia, président du Congrès national des Italo-Canadiens.
Grazie, Sabrina. And as usual, you said it all. I mean, fantastic presentation. You have become really part and parcel of this very beautiful activity. 11 out of 12, that's excellent. And je voudrais vous souhaiter la bienvenue, tous ceux qui sont présents à cette activité, la 12e année. Je voudrais aussi souligner la présence de la présidente, the president of the Italian Canadian Congress of the National Region of Ottawa, Trina Costantini Powell. Welcome aboard, Trina. I know you're very active in Ottawa, and also the president of the CIBA, the Canadian Italian Business and Professional Association. My good friend Paul Fortunio, welcome aboard. And as I said, today we will have a very interesting conference because we have two extraordinary speakers, and they will basically relate their life story, what they have lived in the last 2 years, and how this terrible virus has affected the lives of just about everyone in our society. I would like to thank the people that organized this activity for many, many years also. Michelina Lavoratore of the Casa des Jardins Canadienne Italienne, and her committee, who have done a wonderful job over the years organizing this particular activity. I would like to also thank all the sponsors. As you have seen, we have many sponsors, too many to name, but the media also. Not forget the media, not only our own local media, but also the mainstream media that have supported this activity over the years. Je voudrais aussi remercier les deux conférenciers qui ont accepté l'invitation du Congrès de participer à cette conférence que, comme Sabrina a dit, à chaque année, nous cherchons à souligner quelque chose d'important sur l'avancement de la femme dans notre société. Et cette année, c'est vraiment la nouvelle réalité causée par cet horrible virus qui a changé la vie de presque tout le monde. On le voit dans le domaine médical, on le voit aussi dans le domaine juridique. Il y a énormément de changements, mais nous souhaitons que dans un avenir rapproché, nous allons faire ces conférences en présentiel. Alors, je reviens à Sabrina pour la continuation de cette conférence et j'espère que vous allez poser beaucoup de questions. Merci.
Oui, effectivement, il va y avoir une période de questions à la fin. So you can either write them in the chat box and I'll read them out, or you can unmute yourself. We would love to hear from you. E voi stesse potete fare le domande che volete. Quindi quello sarà dopo. Innanzitutto vogliamo sentire dai nostri ospiti. We're going to go right now to la présidente du comité organisateur du Congrès national italo-canadien, directrice service aux particuliers et développement des affaires à la Caisse populaire des jardins canadienne-italienne. Signor Sciascia l'a déjà mentionné parce qu'elle travaille très fort chaque année pour présenter cet événement. Signore e signori, Michelina Lavoratore.
Grazie Sabrina et grazie per la tua bellissima presentazione. Bienvenue à vous tous, buon pomeriggio, good day. C'est avec un immense plaisir que je me retrouve parmi vous encore une fois cette année comme présidente du comité organisateur de la conférence de la Journée internationale de la femme organisée par le Congrès national des Italo-Canadiens, région Québec. Présentement, oui, nous sommes en train de vivre une nouvelle réalité et qui mieux de nos deux conférencières exceptionnelles, la docteure Emilia Liana Falcone et Marina Boulos-Winton, qui peuvent nous parler du thème de notre conférence virtuelle de cet après-midi, la nouvelle réalité. Elles vont partager avec nous leur expérience personnelle et professionnelle. Merci mesdames d'avoir accepté notre invitation. L'8 marzo si celebra la Giornata Internazionale della Donna, una ricorrenza molto importante per ricordare le conquiste sociali, politiche e economiche che hanno fatto cambiare radicalmente il ruolo della donna nell'ultimo secolo di storia. Facciamo la differenza anche noi per le donne del presente e quelle del futuro. Therefore, let's bond together and recognize the importance and significance of women in our lives and around the world. An unknown author said that the strongest actions for a woman is to love herself, be herself, and to shine amongst those who didn't believe she could. And may I add, and would also. En terminant, j'aimerais remercier tous nos commanditaires et mon comité organisateur, Josie Verillo, et son fabuleuse équipe de femmes. Rinnovo i miei ringraziamenti per l'onore riservatomi ed auguro a tutte voi, in occasione della Giornata delle Donne, a trascorrere avanti insieme una giornata serena e felice e voglio offrire queste bellissime mimosa che sono dietro di me. Grazie per l'ascolto, sperando di vedervi e abbracciarvi in persona l'anno prossimo. Vi auguro una buona conferenza e auguri a tutti.
Grazie mille, Michelina, grazie. We are just about to begin, mais il y a un petit mot. Donc, je vous invite de visionner la prochaine vidéo. C'est député de Saint-Henri-Sainte-Anne, chef de l'opposition officielle, porte-parole de l'opposition officielle, responsable de la Charte des régions, Signore e Signori, Dominique Anglade.
Alors, bon après-midi à toutes les personnes qui participent au congrès aujourd'hui. J'aimerais vous dire à quel point je suis contente qu'il y ait cet événement-là et puis l'importance du rôle de la femme, de son implication dans des activités, dans sa profession, de votre engagement. Ce sont des modèles que vous inspirez à des plus jeunes générations. To all the women participating in this event, I would like to tell you how important your engagement is. It is critical to really empower women. Après 2 ans en pandémie, on a vu que les femmes ont été particulièrement touchées. Mais pour trouver des solutions, c'est avec les femmes impliquées, engagées dans leur vie personnelle, engagées dans leur vie communautaire, engagées dans leur profession, qu'on arrive à faire bouger des montagnes. Thank you again for your engagement, and I think it's all together that will make a difference starting in 2022.
Grazie mille, signore e signori. Secondo me, credo che siamo pronti per iniziare. Je voulais vous dire d'éteindre les micros. Put yourselves on mute. I don't need to say it. I'm following along here. I've never been in a Zoom call where every single person is on mute. Well done. Tina Paolucci, I want the zeppole, though. I see your zeppole as your profile picture. We're all going to come over afterwards. Let us meet our speakers right now. Marina Boulos-Winton is the executive director of Chez Doris. It is a shelter for women in difficulty, and this is a position that she has held since 2015, April. So Marina, you have a little anniversary coming up in the next few weeks. Now, prior to this, she was a course lecturer at the Université de Montréal in the Certificate of Philanthropy program and a consultant for a variety of non-profit organizations. Et à Montréal, de 1993 jusqu'à 1997, Marina a été directrice générale du Bon Dieu dans la rue et avec cela aussi directrice générale de Telle Aide. Et entre 1997 jusqu'à 2019, elle était à New York où elle occupait des postes de directrice générale de la High Water Women Foundation, présidente et chef de la direction de l'organisme national I Have a Dream Foundation et directrice générale nationale adjointe du YWCA des États-Unis. E dal 2015, sotto la direzione di Marina, il budget operativo annuale di Chez Doris è passato da 950.000 a 6,6 milioni e opera 24 ore su 24, 7 giorni su 7 per servire al meglio le donne vulnerabili e senza tetto della città. Signore e signori, Marina Boulos-Winton.
Buongiorno, grazie mille. Voglio anche ringraziare Michelina Lavoratore per questa invitazione. Il mio nome Bulos è un nome libanese, era mia madre che era italiana, il suo cognome era Orfanelli. Allora, sono qui per parlarvi della nuova realtà delle donne in difficoltà a Montréal e vi parlare di She Doris. Allora, vediamo se possiamo... Ecco qua, ecco. Allora, questo è la foto che allora, vado a tentare di parlare in 3 lingue, mi manca la pratica di parlare in italiano. E comunque, allora, questa è la casa di Chez Doris, che esiste da poi, è un'organizzazione caritativa che da poi 45 anni, dove la missione è di aiutare le donne in difficoltà. C'est une maison qui existe, disons, depuis la pandémie. Nos services sont 24 heures et nous aidons les femmes à prévenir l'itinérance ou de les aider quand elles sont dans des situations d'itinérance, de pauvreté, et on les aide aussi avec des problèmes de santé mentale ou des dépendances. Donc, notre refuge, our day shelter, is open 7 days a week. We offer 3 meals a day, respite, clothing, social recreational activities, as well as practical assistance like housing search services, income tax services, a whole gamut of services, and everything with the utmost confidentiality. So what's happened since the pandemic is that we've seen a huge increase in homeless women. And since December 2020, we offer a bank of 41 hotel rooms in downtown Montreal to women who are experiencing homelessness. Just a moment, I'm reconnecting with the clicker. Here we go. There we go. Ok. Dunque, i nostri servizi sono diamo déjeuner, dîner, souper. We also offer access to showers, hygienic products, clothing, dei sacchi di alimentari, e anche laundry service. Like I said, we also offer about 41 rooms at a hotel. We offer information and telephone services. We also manage women's finances for them, which is a great alternative to court-appointed curatorship. We also have quite a few Indigenous women. We do have Italian women who come to Chez Doris, but as well as Indigenous women. We're not far from Cabot Square near Alexis Neon Plaza. So we offer dei programmi per di attività culturali per le donne autoctoni e le donne anche Inuit, e dei servizi di ricerca di appartamenti e dei mobili, e offriamo anche dei servizi di salute fisica e mentali. And we also offer a lot of social recreational activities such as outings. Okay, so let me just go to the next slide. Okay, so in all, so we actually have less visits, fewer visits because of the pandemic, because we can't fit as many women under one roof as we used to. So we used to have well over 30,000 visits to Chez Doors, and we would offer as many as 42,000 meals. So now we are offering a lot more in-home services. But in any case, the women who came to Chez Doors who were homeless, who found themselves homeless, were 875 different women who were in situations of homelessness, and 25% of them had never experienced homelessness before. So we also see progressively every year the number of women who request service for access to showers or free clothing, increasing every single year because I think the reality is that there are more homeless people, unfortunately, that is the new reality with the pandemic. Okay, so here we go. So if I'm not sure if your screens are large enough to see this screenshot, but it's the demographics between our clientele who are homeless and the clientele who have apartments. So you will see that amongst those who are, let's say, who are Indigenous, for instance, are much more affected by homelessness than those who are not. So you'll see that, let's say, amongst the Inuit women, close to 23% of our clientele is Inuit. Oops. There we go. Oh, yeah, that's good. That's good. Let's increase the screen size. Est-ce que vous pouvez augmenter la grandeur? Ça serait mieux. Donc, si vous voyez qu'il y a beaucoup plus de femmes qui sont, qui sont soit inuites ou autochtones, so a lot more Indigenous women are homeless than those who are not homeless. As well, you will see a lot more also Anglophones, an increase in Anglophones who are homeless than those who are not, as well as visible minorities. So those who really are the minorities of Quebec or of Montreal are affected mostly by poverty and consequently by homelessness. Okay, so I'm going to change the screen. Okay, so I just want to go back. Yeah, okay, correct screen. So we started offering we started offering a hotel service as of December 2020. So this is a list or a calculation of all the nights that we provided at the hotel. So in all, we offered 11,762 nights at a hotel to 382 different women, and 73 of those were new. So when I said that we had over 800 different homeless women, the 500 or so women went to sleep at other shelters or were outside. The sad reality is that since the winter started in December of 2021, we probably refuse an average of 4 women a night, and in Montreal in general, there are approximately 30 women who cannot access a shelter because all of the shelters are full. So I'm going to go to the next. I apologize for the delay in going to the next screen because I have to reconnect online to the clicker. So in all, I would say that so we have nous avons hébergé un total de 169 femmes itinérante depuis 2015. On a commencé avec un programme de logement autochtone. Et puis en novembre 2020, nous avons ouvert notre programme de logement à toutes les femmes. Et nous pensons de terminer l'année fiscale avec un total de 174 femmes qui ont été hébergées par chez Doris. Et vous voyez, maintenant, nous avons développé une expertise avec les enfants. La majorité, donc tous les enfants n'étaient pas itinérants avec leur mère. Ça se peut qu'ils venaient d'un refuge pour femmes battues, mais la majorité des enfants ont été replacés avec leur mère, où ils provenaient de la DPJ. So, in other words, the women that we were able to house, for the most part, were reunited with their mothers because they were placed in foster care because their mother did not have housing stability. Let me click reconnect and click. Okay. So, why is there so much homelessness? Pourquoi est-ce qu'il y a tellement d'itinérance? E perché doppiato, homelessness has really doubled. In the past, we'd say that there were approximately more than 3,000 homeless people at any given time, whereas a quarter of them are women. But the sad reality is that when someone is on social assistance, for a single person, it's about $681. And for a couple, for a man and two people who are together, it's $1,054. When it's a family, it's in the low 1,000s as well. But the sad reality is that the programs for social assistance have not kept up with inflation and especially the cost of housing. So we are now finding ourselves with an overwhelming number of homeless people. The pandemic has really exposed the situation because in the past, pre-pandemic, especially women would hide their homelessness. They would stay with friends. They would stay at 24-hour coffee shops or would kill time at public libraries. And this is really not available to homeless people in general anymore. So that is why the city of Montreal is now estimating that there's approximately 6,000 homeless people. And the problem is getting worse. So if I were to, I'm going to reconnect here and then go to the next slide. There we go. So actually, I'm going to go back to the last slide again, or the slide before that. So I'd like to talk about the various programs that we have available at Chez Doris. So the Programme de Relogement Rapide is a rapid housing program where you rapidly find women to go into apartments and they have no support services. There's also a Programme de Logement Subventionné, the acronym is PSL. This means that the government will subsidize a person's apartment in the private market because no social housing is being built and there's too much demand for currently the HLMs for social housing. So we had 30 of those. We have another 15 to go for till the end of the fiscal year. And so what happens is that you will find an apartment with a PSL. So it's kind of like a housing voucher. You have your rent will be subsidized and for a maximum of 5 years until you are able to find social housing if you need it. We also have private funders who will help women that we find who will go into apartments and will even also pay for our costs to follow up with these women to make sure that they continue to be housed and stable. So I'm just going to now, hold on, I lost my clicker. Oh no, hold on. Here we go. Okay. So I'd like to talk about the Programme de Supplément au Loyer. So this is the PSL program that I spoke of. And so these are the prices that they give us to find apartments for women and their children, if they have any children. But the reality is that the average rent of a studio apartment that is empty and is available for rent is at least $893 for a studio apartment. For a 1.5, it's $1,032. Or for a 2.5, it's $1,322. So if there are any, let's say, duplex or apartment owners amongst the audience, the prices might be lower, they might be higher. They might be lower if you've had tenants there for a long time, but as soon as a tenant leaves, the prices are higher. They're now saying that apartments that have been empty of the tenants are now going, since the pandemic, for 24% more than they used to be. And that is why there is a high incidence of homelessness, because people's income have not kept up with the cost of housing, and they're finding themselves to be homeless. So that's the new reality of, unfortunately, of women. And we hope that, with this International Women's Day, that women will be able to find more equity and will be able to be included in as many opportunities as possible to be afforded to them. And so with the growth of Chez Dorse, I'm pleased to also let you know that we will be opening our own shelter in July, and we will also be opening 2 permanent residences with offering affordable housing to women for a total of 46 apartments. And by 2024, we also hope to open a 3rd residence. I think the theme going forwards is really to create affordable housing to people, to make sure that everyone lives have a great quality of life in Montreal. So thank you. Grazie mille, vado a prendere anche delle domande in italiano. Donc voilà, c'est tout. Merci beaucoup. Et je vais vous donner mes coordonnées si jamais vous voulez me contacter. Il y a un site internet, donc mon diapositive, c'était trop en retard, ça a été enlevé, mais vous pouvez trouver mes coordonnées sur notre site internet qui est chezdoris.org. Merci bien, merci, grazie mille.
Thank you so much, Marina. Thank you. And yes, effectivement, on a déjà des questions pour toi. So I see them in the chat. We'll get to those at the very end. So by all means, feel free. If you hear a question, something comes to your mind, jot it down in the chat box. And then if you want to ask it live yourself later, we'll use the raise the hand icon. So we'll share some thoughts, and we'll go deeper into the conversation a little later. But thank you so much for that, Marina Boulos-Winton. Now, normally for our next speaker, I'm always sent over the information, the people's bios, little brief summaries about them, and I use it to prepare and write up my little intros here for you. Now, this year, for our next guest, I actually know a lot about her that is not in the bio. So let me share some of that with you. Did you know that she wanted to be a doctor when she was in high school? Maybe even before, we'll ask her. I also happen to know that she's very musical. She and I performed in concerts together in a jazz band. I played keyboards, She played alto sax. And I remember we would spend weekends rehearsing, practicing before big concerts, before big shows. And she would talk about how she wanted to study medicine. She said, I'm applying at Cégep. I'm going to go into medicine. And here we are now. And une vingtaine d'années plus tard, she's a doctor. Here we are. Also, I had no clue her name was Emilia. We called her Liana. And poi ho saputo che Emilia è il nome della nonna. So here we go. Dr. Emilia Liana Falcone, la directrice de la clinique post-COVID-19 à l'Institut de recherche clinique de Montréal et aussi directrice de l'unité de recherche sur le microbiome et la défense mucosale. No clue what that means. She will explain it to us. Et également professeure adjointe de clinique au département de médecine de l'Université de Montréal, spécialiste des maladies infectieuses au CHUM et titulaire d'une chaire de recherche du Canada. She is studying long haulers, long COVID, and la dottoressa Falcone ha studiato medicina a McGill, ha ottenuto una specializzazione in medicina interna al Tufts Medical Center di Boston. Dopodiché ha trascorso 8 anni presso il National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, National Institutes of Health. Eccoci qui, signore e signori, dottoressa Emilia Liana Falcone.
Well, thank you very much, Sabrina, for that wonderful introduction. I'd like to point out that I have upgraded my alto saxophone for a tenor saxophone. And I do have also very fond memories of you as well. I would also like to thank my co-presenter for sharing such an inspiring and very sobering story. I would also like to thank the organizers of this wonderful event that highlights female strength and perseverance. And I would particularly like to thank Ms. Michelina Lavoratore, not only for inviting me to share my experience today, but also for being such an important advocate for women and their successes. And as we know, success can take many forms. The title of my talk today is The Grit My Mother Showed Me. And although I will be giving my talk in French, je serai heureuse de répondre à vos questions et à offrir des clarifications en français et anche in italiano. Like I usually tell my patients, let's start from the beginning. I was born and raised in Montreal, and my parents were both born in Italy. My father's from Cosenza in Calabria, and my mother's from San Pietro Infine, a small town near Cassino in Caserta. My father owned video stores, back when those were still a thing, and my mom had a long career within the Canada Post organization. Although I did not come from a family of doctors or scientists, I do come from a long line of strong women. My great-grandmother was a true survivor. She had 8 children, some of which were born in fields. And after her husband, my great-grandfather, suffered a war injury, she went out to work in the fields while he looked after the household. She also managed to get a 3rd grade education by sneaking off to school when she should have been working in the fields. My grandmother got a 5th grade education, and at the age of 14 during World War II, went off to work for a wealthy family in the north of Italy, where she acquired many skills, including her cooking skills. And she later moved her whole family to Canada in search of a better future. My mother was the first in her family to get a university degree. She obtained her bachelor's by going to night school while raising me. And I distinctly remember being at her graduation at Place des Arts when I was 6 years old. And afterwards, while we were enjoying a post-graduation dinner at Il Contadino, I looked up from my, spinach cannelloni and asked my mom why some people in her class graduated with great distinction or like cum laude, but not her. To this, she replied, because when you graduate, you will get summa cum laude. And then she added, why do you think I breastfed you until you were able to eat a panino all by yourself? Although I didn't realize it back then, my great-grandmother my grandmother, and my mother were showing me by their actions and the fact that they never really seemed impressed that it is essential to work hard, to strive for excellence, and to persevere. So growing up, I was this type of chubby, creative, nerdy kid that asked for extra homework or advanced projects. I would spend my lunch break painting murals in my classroom or like reading Molière. And although I didn't really know what was out there in the world, I really remember hearing my older cousins talking about places like McGill, Université de Montréal, Cambridge, or the National Institutes of Health, and thinking one day I'm going to go to those places. I began by obtaining my Bachelor of Science in Anatomy and Cell Biology with a minor in music at McGill. At that point, I realized that I also loved doing research because I found it so incredibly creative. I then applied to medical school with the intention of also doing a PhD. And I remember my interviewer being sort of surprised and saying, "Don't you want a family?" And then I, thinking on the spot, I said, "Yes, and I will freeze my eggs if I have to." I ended up completing my medical school training while simultaneously obtaining a master's degree in experimental medicine at McGill. It was at that point that I fell in love with the field of infectious diseases. And I wanted to make sure that I could go to any place in the world for this training. So with that in mind, I moved to Boston where I completed my internal medicine residency. And just as a sidebar, the residency is the training that has to be completed before doing a subspecialty training, such as in infectious diseases. But while I was in residency, I never stopped doing research, whether it was in the evening or on the weekend or whenever I had an elective month. And so when it came time to apply for my infectious disease fellowship, I registered to attend one of the largest North American infectious diseases conferences, and I submitted my research project, which then got selected for a poster presentation. I then cold emailed all of the infectious diseases program directors from all the top institutions in the US and Canada, and I invited them to come see my poster. To my surprise, several actually showed up, including Dr. John Bennett from the NIH, who's one of the grandfathers of infectious diseases. He actually spent 2 hours discussing with me at the conference. So in the end, I did get my pick of fellowships, and I selected the National Institutes of Health, or the NIH. The NIH includes 27 institutes, including the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which is the institute that's led by Dr. Anthony Fauci. I had the privilege of training at this institute for almost 9 years, where I worked in the laboratory of Steve Holland, who's now the scientific director. During this time, I was awarded the NIH Oxford Cambridge Scholarship, which allowed me to complete a fully funded PhD at the University of Cambridge while completing my work at the NIH. So I traveled back and forth a lot. It was also during this time that I met my wonderful husband. And the first thing I told him, honest truth, on our first date was, no matter what happens, at some point, I will move back to Montreal. To which he answered, if there's trees and mountains, I think I'm fine with that. So I said, oh yes, lots of trees and mountains. I just forgot to mention the snow, the freezing rain, the potholes. A couple of years later, we were blessed with the arrival of our first daughter, right as I was in the middle of doing my PhD. At this point, I must say that it is my mother that made this PhD possible. When I was pregnant, she came to Italy to cook for me, to England, Freudian slip, to cook for me. And when we had our first daughter, she came back to help watch her while I was at the lab. And yes, we absolutely had nights when I was on call and my husband had to rush to the hospital with our first daughter because she refused to drink bottled breast milk. By the time our second daughter arrived, I had been recruited to Université de Montréal and the Montreal Clinical Research Institute, also known as IRCM. And the objective of the recruitment was to set up a research program at IRCM that integrated the immunology clinic with a basic science laboratory research program. Needless to say, That first year back in Montreal was very intense. My second child was 5 months old. We were establishing ourselves as a family after an international move. I had to get familiar with the Quebec healthcare system, and I was setting up my very own research laboratory. And the key factor at this point, and one of the major stressors, is the need to quickly secure funding for a lab in order to survive. The thing is, it is not very common to be both a doctor and a full-time lab scientist. While I enjoy the benefit of knowing both worlds, not everybody sees it this way. And yes, there is discrimination and judgment. Sometimes it's because you're too young or too junior. Sometimes the scientists don't understand your clinical responsibilities. And sometimes the doctors don't understand the complexities involved in running a full-time research laboratory. The reality is that there are only 24 hours in a day for everyone, and choices do need to be made. Like sometimes, my house actually looks like Toys R Us came over and just exploded in the living room. So sometimes things won't be perfect, but it's absolutely critical to remain calm and organized. Does it feel like having two full-time jobs? Yes. Is it gratifying? Yes. In fact, I began to truly appreciate the unique position that I was in once the pandemic hit. So here we are, March 2020. I had been in Montreal for a little over 1 year, and I became convinced that COVID would lead to long-term complications. And when I read that first report of an infectious disease doctor in England who could not function normally after 6 weeks from getting COVID, I felt personally touched. I couldn't imagine having what could appear on the surface to most as being like an invisible and misunderstood illness, while also being expected to fulfill all your personal and professional obligations. Let's face it, you can feel completely awful, but your kids will still expect you to show up. For those of you who are not familiar with long COVID, it's a condition where you have at least one symptom that's associated with having gotten COVID. And that symptom, or those many symptoms, have to have lasted for at least 2 months. And they're usually ongoing from the onset of the infection, but they could also appear out of nowhere after having, recovered from the infection. And it has to be going on at least 3 months from the initial infection. There have been over 200 symptoms associated with long COVID, but the most common ones we hear about are debilitating fatigue, brain fog, trouble with memory and concentration, feeling short of breath, having chest pain, having heart palpitations, even smell and taste disturbances. In some cases, that can lead to even nutritional issues. The thing is, in a lot of cases, most of the clinical workup comes back normal, especially if the individual wasn't hospitalized during the acute phase of the infection. But that doesn't mean there isn't a problem. It just means we haven't figured out how to detect it and what causes it. These are the reasons why, from the beginning of the pandemic, not only did I want to evaluate patients with long COVID, but I wanted to do it in a way that was completely unique in Quebec. I wanted to set up a research clinic where every patient is enrolled in a long COVID research study while also being clinically evaluated. This would allow us to comprehensively and systematically evaluate all patients while also establishing a biobank, a collection of data, a collection of samples. With this setup, we could study the COVID complications in more detail, even those that don't have symptoms, while also at the same time establishing an infrastructure to study in the lab the potential causes of long COVID. By understanding the causes, we could potentially identify tests that could help diagnose long COVID clearly, while also potentially identifying new treatment options. With this infrastructure in mind, I started writing grants to secure funding as early as April 2020. During that period, the focus of most was really on managing the acute illness, which is completely understandable. But for almost 1 year, I worked intensely on building the infrastructure of the research clinic right down to the smallest detail, while at the same time trying to think of creative ways to find funding. I thought about how we could help the Red Cross, or maybe there would be implications with going back to work with the CNESST. And maybe we could even offer support for long-term care facilities. I had also approached the provincial government. And finally, after a few months, I obtained funding from the Ministère de la Santé et des Services Sociaux, from the Ministère de l'Économie et de l'Innovation, and from the Fonds Recherche Québec Santé. And it was thanks to this funding that the research clinic began enrolling its first patients in February 2021. A person who was instrumental in helping us secure this funding was Madame Carole Jabet, the scientific director of Fonds Recherche Québec Santé. She really believed in this project, and she's a staunch advocate for women in science. The research clinic has now been active for 1 year. We have contributed to the development of governmental tools to help primary care providers evaluate long COVID. We've created awareness about the condition in the media. We're preparing for publications, and we've established several local, national, and international collaborations to help accelerate the research on long COVID. But while we managed to secure the resources to run the research clinic, we also needed funds to perform the necessary laboratory research that could help us quickly begin to answer the questions about what causes long COVID. While we did get some funding from CIHR and the COVID Immunity Task Force, it is thanks to a generous donation from the Mirella and Alino Saputo Foundation that we are now able to move forward rapidly with this work. Without a doubt, this pandemic has been challenging for all of us. From my personal and professional perspective, there have been highs, there have been lows, there have been sleepless nights. During the year of working intensely and fighting to establish the long COVID research clinic, there were certainly moments where I wondered whether I was doing the right thing, whether it was a smart idea as a new investigator to focus so much on one problem, while I had another research program that I was already working hard to set up, and all this while raising 2 little girls. I have always told myself that I should not have to choose between having a family or a career, even if that career does involve 2 jobs. The reality is that there are only 24 hours in a day, and it all comes down to choices made, organization, and support, both personally and professionally. I believe this to be part of the new reality, especially in the context of the pandemic. So what does this mean, practically speaking, in my specific situation? Well, for example, having chosen to train in the US, I can only take 3 months of maternity leave with each of my children. So I chose a home daycare next to the NIH, and I went to feed my kids during my lunch break. My husband and I chose to let our children sleep in our room for their first 2 years of life. And while I was sleep deprived for 4 years, that was my way of bonding with them and catching up with the hours that I was not near them. And now, as I juggle all my different roles in life, I have the good fortune of having a supportive husband who is also a doctor and who is comfortable sharing in all the kid duties and housework. I also live 5 doors down from my mother, and she continues to not only literally be the hand that feeds me, but she is one of my pillars and that person who tells me the cold, hard truth, even when it's hard to hear. Now, when I find myself in moments where I question my choices and what I'm doing, I remember everything that my ancestors and my family did to ensure a better life for us. I have the freedom to pursue the path that I chose because of the sacrifices that my family, past and present, made. And I'm trying to learn from their actions so that I can teach my daughters through my actions. This leads me to the final point of this discussion. What does it mean to be a woman navigating the world of medicine and science? I will start by saying that some progress has been made. For instance, there are now significantly more females in medical school, which will translate into more female doctors. But there's still more work to be done, not just on behalf of women, but on behalf of every group that is not represented in leadership positions in an equitable manner. The reality is that sometimes, even when we have demonstrated that we deserve a seat at the table, it is still not given to us. Sometimes we get called too much or too demanding when we try to be a force of positive change, while men in similar positions are celebrated for getting things done. Sometimes there are people who seem successful on the surface, but likely due to their own insecurities, will surprisingly do things behind the scenes to hinder the success of others. Sometimes we don't get the tap on the shoulder, that signal that points us towards the opportunity that could make our career. So what is my solution to this? Use your intelligence to find creative solutions and strive for excellence, because the truth and your actions will prevail over any of those backdoor shenanigans. Find your tribe, those people that support you, that elevate you, that tell you the truth. Be the one to give the tap on the shoulder when you can. I strive to ensure that my lab is an equal opportunity and supportive environment. And I work hard to support my lab members in their own pursuits. And no matter what, keep your smile and keep going forward. Because you have made it through 100% of your bad days, and challenges are an opportunity for growth. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Falcone. Really great to hear from you. We have the comments coming in here. Bravo, love your perseverance. Emilia, I'm wondering if your mother is still unimpressed. We'll ask you that in a second. Let us begin the question period. I do see questions here in the chat, although I don't know if anyone wants to raise their hand and ask them yourselves. I'll give you a chance to do that, but if not, I can read through if you don't want to turn your microphone on. Donc, la période de questions, si vous avez une question, vous pouvez utiliser la main, l'icône avec la petite main. Vous pouvez lever votre main, on va venir à vous. Vous pouvez poser la question vous-même, altrimenti lo scrivete nel chat e posso leggere io le domande. I don't see any hands. We do have questions in the chat, though. The first one, Marina, is for you. And there you all are. Hello. So, yes, we have several questions for you. So many people inspired by both of your conversations. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'll start with you, Marina. Tina wants to know, are you accepting donations at this time? What is the greatest need? Paolo has a question in a similar vein, saying, with the upcoming spring-summer period, how can we help?
So for those who want to donate in kind, certainly with the change of season, we do accept seasonal clothing. So rain boots, raincoats. We always need backpacks and always need shoes. We intermittently need underwear, bras, And popular clothing items are tights and sweatshirts, especially for homeless women, because it's just something practical to wear. In terms of funding, or as well, people can donate prepared foods. So, for instance, we have a church group who will prepare muffins once a month. We can have groups of people who will prepare prepared foods, which can even be sent to women who live below the poverty line at their homes for special occasions, like International Women's Day, like Valentine's Day, like Mother's Day. We even have an Italian family who come once a year to prepare. They take over our kitchen and will prepare a New Year's Eve or actually Christmas Eve celebration with all the Italian traditional foods. Because of the pandemic, we haven't had, it hasn't gone gangbusters so much. With the accordion player, we can have, singers. So there you go. So, and as well, we're at the tail end of a major campaign to raise money for 3 new sites, which I had mentioned at the end of my presentation, which is an emergency shelter with 24 beds and 2 residences with a total of 46 apartments. So we even like small appliances like coffee makers, toasters, because we're putting women in apartments, you can even prepare, like laundry baskets with starter kits, like a mop, cleaning products, etc. Like the possibilities are endless for how people can help.
Marina, can you mention where you're located? And in these times of COVID, can people drop off things at the center?
No. Well, yes and no. So we have a shortage of staff, like many other organizations do in the social service and health sectors. So you can drop off things anytime between 8:30 to 3:30 p.m. Monday to Saturday. Even though we're 7 days a week, we have a shortage of staff in the evenings and on Sundays, so we really would prefer that people leave it at that. So we're located at 1430 Chomedy, which is 2 blocks east of Atwater between St. Catherine Street and de Maisonneuve. Our phone number is 514-937-2341. And you can dial 0 for the receptionist, and she can direct you to the right person if you have any questions or you want to see really right then and there what are the immediate needs. So the coordinator of volunteers could also take your call.
Okay, great. We have some questions for Dr. Falcone in the chat. Paolo saying, wow, I did not know there were long-term complications post-COVID. How does that work with repeated COVID patients? Is that something you're tracking?
Yes, absolutely. I will say that there are patients that we follow in our research clinic that have been reinfected. We've also had patients who develop long COVID, not from their first infection, but sometimes from their second infection. And now we are beginning to see the impacts of Omicron on the risks of getting long COVID. And it does appear that even individuals who got infected with Omicron are having some long-term complications, at least as far out as we are at present time.
Okay, we have another question for you. Rosetta wants to know, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
That's a good question. Well, I would say that, first of all, don't sweat the small stuff. And yes, it is worth listening in class and doing all your readings because you'll have a lot less time to do it later. And follow your gut instinct, because I think at the end of the day, we have a sense of what's right, what's wrong, and the direction we're supposed to take.
Great. Does anyone else have a question, either in the chat or if you want to raise the little hand icon? I don't see a hand right now. If you're typing it in, here we go. We're getting more. Emilia, you are a great role model for your daughters. So not a question, just a comment there.
Thank you. That's really kind.
I have a question for Marina as well. Marina, are many of the women you are seeing in Chez Doris, do they come with their children? And are there services available for women with children?
So there are very few shelters with for women and children who are homeless. Most of the shelters that are available are for women who are victims of domestic abuse, and also the shelters the shelters for domestic abuse are lacking during the pandemic, especially during the pandemic. A sufficient number of beds to help both women and children, and that's why we suspect that there have been more children placed in foster care with youth protection because of the lack of shelters for domestic abuse. I would say that at least 20% of our clientele are victims of domestic abuse who have come to us because there's no room elsewhere. And the unfortunate thing with shelters, emergency shelters in general for the homeless, is that most of them are not 24-hour services. So it's a really disconnected service where you have to, which includes us, where you come to our day shelter, then you have to be transported to another location in order to sleep, and then you come back to have your 3 meals essentially, because it's not set up to house people, to sleep. So we will have that service across the street. We had planned it before the pandemic, and then now we're realizing, wow, it's going to be too small, but we'll continue with it because it's only going to be 26 spots, and we're offering right now 41, and we're refusing women every night.
More questions here coming in. Terry wants to know, there's a question for Emilia. If we have the 3 COVID vaccines, could we still get COVID?
The chance is, yes, you could still get COVID if you've had the 3 vaccines. The odds are, though, is that the illness will be much less severe. That's the whole point of the vaccine, and it does do its job in that sense. But yes, you can still get COVID.
Question for Marina from Rosetta. Can anyone volunteer to support women getting back on their feet in the workplace? For example, role-playing interviews, preparing resumes.
Absolutely. People can volunteer. We always have a need for volunteers to serve meals. So breakfast, lunch, dinner, as well as sorting clothing. In terms of the resumes, we've expanded quite a bit our services in the last 6 years. We used to only be open 8:30 to 3 p.m. Now we're open 8:30 to 9:30 p.m. and then our hotel service starts at 9 p.m., making us a 24-hour service. By expanding our housing program, and getting to know the women that we help, as much as we found this out recently because banks have even been approaching us for to hire some of the women that were affected by homelessness. and 80% of the women we help do not have their high school degree. So I think one of the next steps that we will do is probably try to improve all the challenges that they have, including getting their GEDs and making them more employable. The sad reality also is that Indigenous women are greatly affected by homelessness, and none of them, especially the Inuit who come from up north, have their high school degrees. Most of them are not also bilingual. They have been taught mostly in English by the federal government. And so when they come to an urban environment, to improve their quality of life. They also have a shortage of housing. So they come to Montreal, but they're further victimized by people who prey on them. Sorry, that's my dog.
Guest appearance.
So they don't have high school degrees and they're not bilingual. So it's really hard for them to be on the job market. So there's a systemic problem with chronic social problems up north, including addictions.
We have a question. This is a two-part question for Emilia. Filomena is asking, with the world opening up and with the data you have collected, do you think we are opening up too quickly? Do you think COVID will ever be part of our past?
That's a big question, and one that I wish I had a clear-cut answer to. Opening up too quickly, I think, these are decisions that are being taken with data that as it becomes available and as we're learning. And I think in this case, we have to balance safety with health in every sense of the word, including, survival of businesses, mental health, children's education, and so on. So it's tough, and we have to make decisions sometimes that have calculated risks, hoping that we took the right decisions. Will COVID become part of our past? My hope is that it will get to a point where it just becomes, it's another circulating virus. Will it ever be completely gone? I don't think so. It'll probably always be somewhere in the background. But the hope is, with mutations that render strains weaker, with improved vaccination, maybe vaccines that are adapted to emerging variants. I think we did a great job with vaccination in such a short amount of time. I am hoping that this could be something that we live and we deal with and can move on from. The question is, what's going to happen with long COVID in this scenario? And that's what we're really asking ourselves, because we know that even people who didn't have a severe infection, or sometimes we even had an asymptomatic infection, could have long-term complications. And so I think the data that we're now collecting in real time, looking at what happens after Omicron in the setting of people who are vaccinated, which we know vaccination also does help protect against long COVID, will maybe be an indicator as to what's to come in the future with respect to long COVID.
Marina, another question for you. Yasmina wants to know, would it be possible to volunteer by tutoring these women in English, French, if we have experience?
Yes. We used to have, before the pandemic, a school that would come, I think it was called Frontier College, that would teach women a second language. The problem is I think with the charitable sector in general, is the lack of space and the lack of technology for these women to partake in, let's say, educational activities or social recreational activities. We used to have 90 to 120 women a day come into our day shelter, and now we can only have 45 at a time because we still have to have a meter distance between people. So give us a call and we'll see what if there's a match with your skills. We're also looking for board members. We're presently looking for a treasurer in time for our next annual general meeting, which will take place in June, as well as we have some generous donors who have set aside money to set up an endowment for us, which means to save some capital and you use just the interest. And so we're looking to establish an investment committee and somebody with investment experience to be on our board of directors. So if you know of anybody, please do give me a call or tell them to contact me.
And Marina, where do you get your funding to operate?
So before the pandemic, only 20% of before the pandemic, our operating budget was $2.3 million. We had about 26 employees. We're more than 65 now and have an operating budget of $6.6 million. A lot of that now comes, I would say that between 30 to 40% of our funding is now governmental because of the pandemic. So for instance, by offering a hotel, just the hotel alone, to rent the hotel is $85,000 a month. But our budget will probably not change much because of these 3 new points of service that we will be operating. So much of it comes from the private sector. So quite a bit of money comes from the foundations. So organizations like the Marcel and Jean Coutu Foundation, the Hewitt Foundation, who else? Doggone Foundation, like a lot of large foundations, as well as very generous individuals. And we send out 2 direct mail, actually, twice a year. So we find new donors every year, thanks to direct mail and people who call us. Really, it's mostly through private donations.
I see there's a hand up in the chat. It is Yasmina. If you have another question, Yasmina, go ahead, take the floor.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry I didn't before. It's just that I'm sitting in a coffee shop and it was a bit noisy, so I didn't want to inflict that upon you. I actually have a question for Dr. Falcone. You mentioned that you had to balance your career and your household and, having time with your children. And I was just wondering, do you feel like the pandemic affected career women's invisible labor at home, their responsibilities with child labor, with taking care of the household? And I wanted to know if you also felt a difference with schools being closed, with kindergartens being closed. Do you think that would have made a big difference?
Yes, I think the pandemic has had a huge impact with that, because everyone's been expected to still, perform their job. And now we've had to do it while having children at home, which has had it, has its benefits. I believe it allowed us to actually spend more time with our kids and to actually have a little bit more quality family time. But it was hard. I didn't see the requirements decrease, especially in my job. So you had to become really creative. And yes, many a times a child showed up in a Zoom meeting yelling inappropriate things. So I think, women, parents in general, and not just women, everyone has had to become very creative and find creative ways of striking that balance and being able to still deliver professionally and personally.
Thank you, Yasmina. Nice to hear your voice as well. Thank you. Connie has a question. Hi, Connie. Hope you're well. Connie wants to know from Dr. Falcone, what advice would you give to someone who sometimes feels they have imposter syndrome?
Imposter syndrome. Yeah, I've heard about that, and I think some of us have lived different degrees of that. What I came to realize over time is that a lot of people feel like they don't really know what they're doing. I mean, even though they look like they do, and I think that you might think you have you might feel like you have imposter syndrome, but chances are someone else does too. And so I think we shouldn't let that limit us. And I know it's hard, but you have to just move past it. And you're there for a reason. You deserve to be there. There's something that you bring to the table. So own it and just focus on delivering it. The rest will sort itself out.
Thank you. Marina, question from Michelina. Are there success stories that you can share with women who have used your services?
Certainly. There is a woman who was homeless and is doing a college a 1-year certificate in medical administration with CDI. So CDI has offered 2 scholarships. So this woman will be probably graduating by the summer and will very likely get a job. There's another woman who is Indigenous. She finished her GED. She has 5 children, and she is going to school now, thanks to CDI again, learning how to work in a nursery school. So that will put her off of welfare. And she has a part-time job as well at a nursery school, so as a start. We also have another woman who actually the pandemic, this was before the pandemic, finished her GED as well. She grew up from the age of 15 in foster care, so dans les centres d'accueil, so in an institutionalized environment. People who grow up in institutions, I think, end up being rudderless, unfortunately, as soon as they're turned out when they turn 18 and don't have much direction or role models. Married somebody who was wrong for her and was violent, came to Chez Doris to give up her child, actually, up for adoption. And it took her many years of being dependent on Chez Doris to then finally finish her GED. And she took her course to become the healthcare worker in the seniors' homes. And so that's the work that she is doing now. She's off of welfare and earning her living. So I think there's different degrees of successes. Women come to us from all walks of life. Certainly the fact that I said that a lot of women hadn't graduated from high school is shows the demographics, but we also have women who are ladies from Westmount, let's say, who are come out of a divorce and are left completely penniless because they did not, perhaps they were had a setback because of health, mental health, or they're divorced and are left with very little money. So it can really happen to anyone is probably what I can say to everyone.
Marina, who is Doris in Chez Doris?
Good question. So Doris is a woman who came from Halifax, and she was a half white, half Scottish, half Black woman from Halifax who fled an abusive relationship and ended up in Montreal in the early 70s. She was found, so she was in Montreal for approximately two years, and she was known to Ville Marie Social Services at the time. But after there weren't very many services for women back then. There were maybe only 65 beds for homeless women. And before the pandemic, believe it or not, there were only 110 beds for homeless women before the pandemic, which really isn't a lot since the 1970s. And anyway, she was a victim of a brutal murder, and her murder was never solved. And community members were moved by her story, and it took them 2 years to establish a day shelter. And among the community members was included a Grey Nun who helped found Chez D'Ors. So it's named after her.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much.
And unfortunately, we know of D'Ors's every year who fall victim to brutal murders, or they die from the weather, from drug overdoses, or they're preyed upon.
And Terry writing in here to ask, what effect does it have on your employees to deal with women that are in need?
I think the pandemic has not been easy, especially the last round of the pandemic. We had 15 employees get the Omicron virus. And the shelters also for homeless people, the shelter for homeless people was completely full, and that's why they established the soccer stadium. But because the shelter for homeless people with Omicron, with the virus was full, it meant that we had to keep 5 people with the virus among us because they had nowhere to go. So that was very difficult on the staff. And we experienced, especially in January, a 43% turnover rate in staff because it was just too hard on the staff. We've also seen problems in how to deal with situations with the virus. So, for instance, our caseworkers were taught how to do their own testing, to test clients and staff if they have the virus. And then after the 6th test, it was the first one that turned out positive, and the employee said, well, wait a minute, they didn't give us any protective equipment. We have no gowns, we have no visors, we have no gloves. Like, they taught us with, online with no other, or how do we throw away protective equipment? So it's always up to us to ask questions on how to deal with things, and it's just extremely stressful on the staff. I always stress to people who, young women and men, if they're going to work in a particular field, that before they graduate, to do volunteer work or do an internship to make sure that this is the field that they want to go into, because our experience is that if we take on somebody who has no experience whatsoever in dealing also with psychiatric women who increasingly have psychiatric problems and at times are violent, like we've never seen so many instances of violence amongst our clientele, that they do the volunteer work, because we will see a retention rate of only 50%. There's a higher retention rate with people who have experience. We are also in the midst of hiring a clinical coordinator, because we typically hire women who are caseworkers with bachelor's degrees and with experience, but there are so many psychiatric problems now that we don't have the experience with, that we need a clinical coordinator, so somebody who has experience with psychiatric problems to coach our staff to know what to do with situations of aggression, hoarding, a lot of problems that maybe we haven't encountered so much about, and addictions. There's a lot of much more addictions now as well.
I don't see any other questions. I'll wait a couple of more seconds in case anyone wants to raise a hand or type something in the chat. And Marina, to confirm, is it your son's birthday today?
It is!
Happy birthday!
My son,
Happy birthday
Conrad,
to your son.
who is a student at McGill. Yeah.
Thank him for sharing you with us today.
Thank you.
Listen, I think that wraps it up for the questions. Un gros merci. Grazie. Thank you so much, Dr. Emilia Liana Falcone and Marina Boulos-Winton. Thank you so much to you all for being here today and for sharing your stories. Definitely a memorable one. And maybe next year we could do this in person. So thank you. There are some lucky winners to announce before I let you go, because for everyone participating, your names have gone into a draw, and there are 3 pairs of tickets to give away, and this is to the Sebastian Maniscalco show. So if you are fans, your name went into a draw, and so I'm just getting the winners' names right now, so I do want to say congratulations. Luisa Cimino, you are going to see Sebastian Maniscalco. You get a pair of tickets. James DeSano, thanks so much for being with us today. You are getting a pair of tickets. And Rosetta Palazzi, you are getting a pair of tickets to see Sebastian Maniscalco. So someone from the Congresso will be in touch with you tomorrow. They'll be giving you a call, and you guys can sort out all of those details. So I want to thank you all again so much for spending part of the afternoon here with us. Merci beaucoup. Merci à nos conférencières. It's really good to just highlight some people in the community and hear about the incredible work that you are doing, both your personal experiences and your professional. Grazie a tutti. And I leave you with this thought, as I do every year. Here's to good women. May we be them. May we know them. And may we raise them. Today is yours, so is every day. So happy International Women's Day. Merci beaucoup d'avoir partagé votre après-midi avec nous aujourd'hui. Buona festa delle donne, l'8 marzo, martedì. Thank you. Bye.